Today we are going to be canning up some chicken breast. You can see here I got an awesome deal, $1.28 a pound, just under 5 pounds, and it was only $6.26. Now both packages are about the same weight, so we're looking at roughly just under 10 pounds of chicken breasts. So let's get this cut up and I will show you how I can it. Now I always use canning salt and a half a teaspoon per pint. Now this is something you can leave out if you don't want to add salt. I just really like the flavor that it adds. Plus, when I open a jar, you literally could eat this right out of the jar. It's so good. It might not look good, but it is really good. So I'm just going to get all the salt in these jars. And now I'm going to open the chicken breast, but first I wanted to show you this. I was pretty surprised that I found these at my local Winco. They're hatched, raised, and harvested in the USA. There's no probiotics, hormones, or any bad stuff in here. So I was actually thrilled I got these at the price that I did. So I am not a fan of any kind of fat or gristle or anything like that, so I cut all these pieces out. Now, any pieces that have some meat on here, we do have a young dog that's training to be my daughter's service dog, and we use chicken in there so we can save those pieces for the dog. So I'm just showing you how I open this up, and this little tenderloin off to the side, I cut that off after I cut the little thin bottom piece off. Then I cut the main part in half, the tenderloin in half, and then I just proceed to cut it into about 1-inch chunk sizes, and that is the recommended size. Once I get up to the thickest part of the chicken breast, I actually take that and I cut it down in half again because it is quite a bit thicker than the rest of the chicken. And so by the time I cut that in half and then in half again, I'm kind of maintaining a very nice, even 1-inch size to my chicken. Now I'm going to show you, I start loading up my jars. And as soon as I get a little bit in there, I just take my fingers and very lightly tamp it down. You don't want to smash it, but by tamping it down a little bit, when you cook this chicken, you will see in some of the shots that I have in the end, it cooks down quite a bit. So if you don't tamp it down, you literally will end up with only about a half of jar full of chicken, which is a lot of wasted space when you're going to all this effort. So by tamping it down, you are allowing it to, as it cooks down, leave you with just about a quarter of a loss at the top. And if you've never canned chicken before or any kind of meat raw packed, which is what we are doing, you start everything cold. You don't put any liquid in it because the meat as it cooks creates its own juice. So I'm going to work on getting the rest of these chicken breasts cut up here. And we'll get this jar topped off. And I will show you here that I fill it all the way up to the 1 inch of headspace, which is about the bottom of the line at the top of the jar. And it'll cook down to right about there. That's about average. And I'm just going to work on the rest of these and we'll get our jars filled. Now I'm just giving you a different angle here of filling up the jars with the chunks of chicken. And I do have a video out also on canning ground beef and canning chunks of just regular beef. If you're interested in that, I will link those down below. But we're just going to work on getting all of these filled up to that 1 inch of headspace. Some people put the salt in the top. I like to put it on the bottom just so that it doesn't interfere with my lid. And now we have them all filled. I'm going to take my white distilled vinegar, and what you want to do is you can have a cloth. I just used ripped up pieces of paper towel, and I'm going to get that wet with the vinegar, and then I'm going to wipe the rims of all of my jars. And I'm doing this because any fat or chicken debris that might have gotten onto the rim will prevent it from sealing properly unless I clean it off. And vinegar is what we need to use to remove any fat or grease. Now I'm going to take my pre-rinsed 4 jars canning lids because we are starting everything cold. The jars are cold, the chicken is cold, the lids are cold, and my canner and the water in the canner will be cold. So I just pre-rinse these to remove any factory debris that could potentially be on there. They usually are really good. Now I'm going to put on my rings and I'm going to twist those just finger tight. I don't want to reef those down at all, because I want to allow the pressure canner to push the air that is trapped inside the jar currently up and out. And if the ring is too tight, it prevents it from being able to do that. So now you can see I'm putting cold tap water into my canner. That was a splash of vinegar because we have well water that's very full of minerals, so it discolors things and can make the jars cloudy. I'm going to start loading my cold jars into my cold water and again my cold canner. And I have two different sizes of pints, sizes just as in some are a slight bit taller than the other ones. So I'm just trying to make sure that I get all of the same height ones on the bottom rung before I put my next spacer in between the two so that it sits flat on there nicely. And once I got that on there, I only had 2 more jars to put in. I didn't quite have a full canner this time. Now on my All-American 921 canner, it does not come with a seal. So you have to take some olive oil and rub that olive oil around the rim of your lid. And then I also take, after I've gotten this part done, and I wipe that same inner rim where the two meet. Whoops. I wipe the inner rim all the way around with the olive oil. Now we can put our lid on. It has little hooks. You set it down and then give it a light twist. And then what you want to do is make sure that you have an even height on all sides of your canner, and I just use the fingertip method and adjust it as needed. Once I've got the openings about the same around the whole canner, you just take your bolts, pull them up, and very lightly screw them down. And you don't want to reef them down yet because you want to be sure you get all sides lightly put on so that that spacing for the lid stays where you want it. Then once you've gotten that done, you can go back and give them a good reef down. We're going to turn the canner on very low to start. You can see the pressure gauge is showing 0 because we are starting from cold. There's a better view there. We're going to turn the heat on, get this up to where this is blowing a steady stream of steam. And once it is doing that, this gauge will start to rise. And we're going to vent this. Once we see that steady stream of steam, it's going to vent for 10 minutes. Then once the timer goes off and this has vented like this for 10 minutes, we are going to put our weight on. I am at 10 pounds of pressure for my elevation. Be sure to check yours for your poundage. And you can see how the pressure is already starting to rise within the canner. As soon as it starts to jiggle, just like that, you can see we've reached the 10 pounds of pressure. I am going to set the timer and let this process for 75 minutes. And once it is done, I have to wait till the pressure comes all the way back down to 0. And then I will crack the lid of my canner and open it just slightly and let it sit like that for about 15 minutes before I take my jars out. And once I take them out, you can see they're still bubbling and you can see the cook level. And I just think they look so pretty. Some people think it's ugly chicken, but I like it. You can see how there's a little bit of clouding on my lids, but not much. That's mostly just from the droplets after I took them out. And they will continue to bubble like this. It's not a problem. It's completely normal. And now that they have cooled, you can see the height of the chicken in my jars. This one is the lowest because that was the last jar I filled and I didn't quite have as much chicken as I did in the rest of the jars, but you can see by just lightly tamping it down, you get a good consistent, almost full jar every time. So now I'm going to take the rings off. This is the next day. They have sat for 24 hours. And you do not want to store your jars with the rings on. We are going to bring them over to sink because we're going to give them a nice little wash because during the canning process, some of the liquid inside that jar can siphon through and get on the outside of the jar. And I just don't like to store anything with any kind of grease or smells on it that could attract anything that I don't want to come into my pantry. So now the reason, if you've not canned before, that you do not store your jars with the rings on is because if your jar sounded like it sealed, but sometime during the storing process became unsealed, that ring holds it down and it could cause you to eat a jar that you should not be eating. So one way you can tell is by the finger tap method. You tap the top of the lid on the jar, and if it makes a higher like pinged sound, that means it is sealed. If it makes a thud sound, that generally means you have a false seal, which means you can pick up the jar by the lid and it feels solid and it feels like it's sealed, but it isn't a true seal. And if you have one of those, just put it in the refrigerator and be sure you use it within the first week of canning. So now I'm going to rinse all these off. I'm going to get them set over onto my rack with a fresh towel to air dry. And I'm also just going to go through with a paper towel and wipe off the tops so that I can label these. Now I'm going to label them, and I will take them down and store them in my pantry. Now don't forget, I mentioned I have some other videos. If you're interested in those, I will link those down below. Otherwise, I just want to thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time.